Hello guys and welcome to a brand new series on my channel. Today I'm going to be playing Airway Sim, a brand new for me airline simulator, which is I've been playing it for about 2 or 3 in real life months now, and I've just found it to be a much more realistic and fun alternative to Airway Sim. It is paid, but you do get a 1 week free trial, so you can try it out for free. And because it's paid, there's no pay to win aspect to the game. There's no I pay gems, I get better airplanes, etc., 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 which could often make Airway Sim still winnable, but much less fun than it could be if it was um, a game where money was not made and giving a direct advantage in the game. Now, what are the advantages of Airway Sim? Now, the first thing is you can have one account in multiple worlds. As you can see, I could, in theory, be in up to 7 worlds. I'm already in 2. The game, Air Tycoon goes from usually around 1955 or 1960, all the way up till 2035 in the future, though there's no futuristic airplanes introduced, which is a bit of a shame, but that's fine as well. Another thing about this game, which is different to similar to Airway Sim or Air Tycoon Online, is you start off small with a little bit of money, and you can grow into a really, really large empire. For example, if you take a look at my routes here, you can see my favorite base, of course, London Heathrow. And you can see my routes spreading across the world. Now, what are the main advantages of this game? Well, I really, really like this game because of its highly, highly realistic demand model. For example, in Air Tycoon Online, if I go into my route planning tab, for example, we can take a look at some of the routes I might be looking at. So London Heathrow to the whole world. There's a lot of routes to London. Now, for example, in real life, London Heathrow to New York John F. Kennedy is one of the biggest routes in the world, and that is reflected here. As you can see, almost 9,000 demand every day. For example, Monday has 9,000, Tuesday has 7,800 demand, so on and so forth. You can see my own supply, the total supply, who owns what share at what time, and the scheduling time is very important in this game, which I'm a big fan of. And basically, due to the highly realistic demand model, it makes this game more similar to a real life airline, where it's a lot about cost saving measures or increasing profitability measures. For example, it's highly advantageous to not lease aircraft past your initial growing stage because you can have a much higher margin. I'll give you an example of this. So if I go into the statistics tab where I can view the statistics of airlines, I choose to try and encompass as much of the market as possible. So as a result, I have an 11% margin and a total quarterly profit of 1.4 billion. Meanwhile, my biggest competitor has a higher quarterly profit, but instead he's focused on efficiency. So even though he occupies a much smaller percent of the market, he's almost double or more of my margin. And thanks to this much larger margin, he's actually making a lot more than me from a lot smaller market. So it's basically up to you how to play. Do you want to try and take up as much of the market as possible less efficiently than your competitors, or less of the market more efficiently than your competitors? Another thing which makes it fun is because of the highly realistic demand model, you can have a much better idea of how demand is going to be. You don't fly London Heathrow directly to every small city in the United States and achieve a full airplane. But instead, you can run very, very many schedules to some of the largest cities in the world with no problem at all. For example, London Heathrow to Los Angeles also has an enormous amount of demand, 6,000. Singapore has, I think, almost close to 8,000 daily demand. Yes, 7,500 a day, as you guys can see here. And Johannesburg, where, for example, in Air Tycoon Online, you can maybe run 2 large aircraft at most from London to Johannesburg. In this game, what is it? What are we at now? This is probably like 30 or more daily flights to Johannesburg, and that's realistic. That's very similar to the way the demand is in real life. Now it still does have its disadvantages. It doesn't have it doesn't model passenger transfers still, which just seems to be something which is a bit too complex for any of these airway simulators to do. If you know any airline simulator which realistically models passenger transfers, I'd love to hear about it. I'd love to try it. But yeah, so that's basically Airway Sim. Oh yeah, additionally, there is a very, very good cargo model called city-based demand. Now, because we lack transfers, of course, we cannot make a FedEx type operation where we capture all the demand into a city like Memphis, I think it is for, or Nashville. I can't remember. Okay, but or Louisville for UPS, I think. You can't capture all the demand in that manner. Instead, to capture cargo demand, if we go into open new route and go to route planning, for example, Frankfurt is one of the main cargo hubs, we just get something called potential demand. And basically, the potential demand is based on population and economics of the area. So, for example, Germany in real life is known for an enormous amount of exports. So, there is an enormous amount of outgoing cargo demand from Germany, and where is a lot of it going, for example? And the answer to that would be to the United States. Now, I think I accidentally searched Europe only. Yep. So, yeah, for example, if we go from Frankfurt to Houston, we get an enormous potential cargo demand, and we get some actual cargo demand. So, what does this difference come from? Well, the actual cargo demand, as I said, it cares about the people's location and economic situation. So, a lot of this demand could be going to nearby airports, and it decides which airport to get the actual demand to go to based on aspects like how much supply there is, very crucially the distance to the actual target location of the cargo, and so on and so forth. And yeah, cargo is a pretty new and overpowered part to this game, but I'll get into that more as I gotta get a drink of my water because I haven't done a lot of talking for a while. I'm getting thirsty real fast. Alright, so what is special about this game? What is the gameplay like? Well, let me try and show you a little bit. So, I don't think I have too many aircraft right now. For example, I have a few single long-haul aircraft unused, and some shorter range unused 737s, and the rest of my planes are scheduled. But this is what the scheduling page looks like. And as you can see, you have to specify about what time of each day a plane takes off and lands. And this is a pretty intricate part of the game because, for example, passengers are very picky about the time of the day. They want it to be, after 5 or 6 a.m. preferably, and before midnight preferably, and then it gets better even towards the middle of the day. Like 8 a.m. is a really large, popular takeoff time, for example. And the way you space out your flights matters. For example, if I go into my route planning tab again, as you guys can see, these are some of the most used tabs in this game. It's a bit like Spreadsheet Simulator because there's not a lot of visual aspect to this game, but I'm okay with that. And we go into my route planning here. If we take a look at all my flights, I've spaced them out so that flights take off every half an hour to an hour. And basically what this accomplishes is, for example, on each day of the week, my flight will take off at 11, the next flight will take off at 11:40, then 12:10, etc., etc., etc. And what this accomplishes is it makes sure that not all your demand or supply is taking off at the same time of the day, because when a passenger is looking to fly, they might be looking to fly out at this time or that time, and if there's already so much supply for that time of the day, there's no point in supplying more. So spacing out your flights and stuff like that is important in this game, and I think that's a really cool and realistic aspect. Now, because of that, basically, people are forced into making more realistic airlines. For example, your bases are not spammable. You can have a maximum of 10 bases. Your base airports, which is where you can open up routes from as your home base, for example, can only be in the same economic zone, basically. So, for example, if you start in the United States, you can only open new bases in the United States and I think Guam and maybe Puerto Rico, but I'm not sure. For example, if you start in the EU, you can only open new bases in the EU. If you start in China, you can only open new bases in China. If you start in a tiny African country, you can only keep making bases in that tiny African country, for example. So it becomes a balance of, do you want to try and be the biggest company in a small pond? So large, the biggest company in a small market, say, I'm trying to think of a small market that's not too small, in Venezuela, or you could try and be the most successful out of a very competitive European or US market. I think the US is most definitely the most competitive. If we take a look at the top scoring airlines, we can see how many American flags we get on there. They're mostly American and European flags. We got Singapore. Um, Honestly, we should have Hong Kong on here, even though Hong Kong's a city-state. So if you start in Hong Kong, that's your only base. But you can. I've seen companies with more than 2,000 aircraft flying out of just Hong Kong, thanks to the very high cargo demand, which is pretty intense. Get some more water here. So yeah. Anyway, so how am I doing in this world? Now, I'm doing decently. Um, as you guys can see, if I go into my statistics tab, I'm 22nd on richest CEO, third on total revenue, and I'm very close to second, but I'm long behind first. Doing decent on revenue, need to work on the margin. My margin is really poor, especially considering, if we take a look here, I have a really good fuel hedge right now. If you don't know what fuel hedging is, it's basically an agreement to buy fuel at more than the market price, but you get to keep paying that exact price for the next while. And it's a high risk, high reward. So sometimes if you hedge and the fuel price goes down, then you pay a lot of extra money for fuel. But if you hedge and the fuel price goes up, as I have done here and now again here, you save a metric shit ton of money. So yeah, right now I have a really good hedge going and still have a mediocre margin. So that's very worrisome. For example, I think over 20% of my company's expenses is fuel, if I remember correctly. Total operating expenses, yeah, fuel. 24% of my operating expense is fuel. That means if fuel price were to double from what I'm paying now, I wouldn't even be profitable anymore, which is pretty sad. Now, oh yeah, going back to what I was saying earlier about efficient company versus large company. To be the most successful, and both have a lot of merit because half the scoring factors for this game for your final score, quote unquote, as you guys can see here, I mean, what the frick is score? Half of the things are based on efficiency of your company, and half of them are based on size. It's a bit biased to companies which start near the beginning of the world, but whatever. So yeah, I'm like utilization, I'm 43rd. Aircraft fleet size, I'm 7th, but considering most of my planes are 777s, the actual total passenger capacity of my fleet is incredibly high, as you guys will see in a second. Revenue passenger kilometers. What does this mean? This is how many passengers are paying, basically. So yeah, it's basically, this is a measure of how much money I'm making from passengers, and it's basically second, how much money I'm making from cargo, revenue, freight ton kilometers, and so on and so forth. Now we have available freight ton kilometers and revenue freight ton kilometers. You can see a big discrepancy in my rank there, and it's mostly because planes in this game have belly cargo. Basically, what belly cargo is your planes can carry a small amount of cargo, even your passenger planes in the passenger compartment. Yeah, they can't. They can only carry light and quote unquote standard cargo in this game, and there's also heavy cargo, but those can only be flown in actual freighters, not combis, even just actual freighter aircraft. And thanks to the 777 having a very large belly cargo compartment, it's often flying completely empty. If I can give you an example, if I go into the route planning tab once again, London Heathrow to FAJS, that's Johannesburg, we can see here basically, yeah, potential cargo demand 7,000 kilograms, and my supply is 317,000. Or this is the total supplies as mine. So as you can tell, yeah, that's gonna be a mostly empty uh, cargo compartment, and that's why my cargo load factor is low. But cargo is actually, in fact, from what I can find, the most profitable in matter. As you can see, all my most profitable aircraft are cargo, and also some of my least profitable aircraft are cargo. But these will pick up in due time, because the cargo, I'm still trying to shift the cargo demand to the airports I'm flying to, from where they were originally. So yeah, if we take a look at cargo, there's a lot of cargo between Frankfurt, or between, yeah, Germany and Japan. So like flying a nearly full MD-11 from Frankfurt to Japan is making almost $1 million just from one flight, which is, I don't know, that's insane. Look at that, 816,000 in cargo revenue, which, wow. All right. Anyway, so what's it like to actually play this game, I guess, because we've done a lot of theory, but there's not a lot of playing, to be honest. What there is a lot of is scheduling, and unfortunately I don't have much to schedule right now, because I don't have very many aircraft, and I just thought, hey, why not record an episode? But to get an idea of what scheduling is like, let's take a look at one of my most recently scheduled planes in, where was I going? Where was I flying? Hold up. Okay, that reminds me. So this, for example, was one of my most recently scheduled planes. As you guys can see, the blue bars are basically the flight, and the spaces in between are the turnaround times. So you want to be able to fit your weekly A check in. The B check is once monthly, but you have to pick when it happens as well. These are maintenance checks, which are mandatory, otherwise your airline will be shut down. But yeah, so basically how this works is, what I would normally do is I would go into a new tab, and I would go into the route planning or open new route tab, and I would start looking. So Frankfurt to the whole world. Well, I know we're most likely to get cargo to North America or Japan, so I'll use North America in this case. Now I might check Salt Lake City, and I'll see, oh, somebody's already supplying the cargo. So maybe not the best idea for me. Brexit and links yet. I could look into competing them later, but for now, I'll try and pull my own demand. So then I might stumble upon Pittsburgh, for example, and find, oh, I'm the only supplier, and I will try and pull the demand over to Pittsburgh. Now, as you can see, it's not pulling very well. This is the demand, and this is my supply. If this were to pull more of the demand, it would become profitable, but I'm yet to see if that's going to happen. I'm quite inexperienced with cargo myself, so it'll be interesting to see what cargo actually pulls over and becomes my demand, and what cargo will just kind of stay low occupancy. But even low occupancy cargo is mildly profitable. But yeah, as you guys can see, like, this is basically what I would do. I would see this, and remember, location is very important for cargo, and if Richmond happens to be too close to a lot of other major cities, in this case it is. For example, I'd go to Google Maps, and I'll look at okay, Google Maps, please load, thank you. Richmond. And okay, not that Richmond. Yeah, you can see I'm in Vancouver, by the way. But yeah, so like, I don't know where it was, but it's probably somewhere over here. If I search again here, will it show up? No, Richmond, USA. I'd be like, you know what? It's somewhat close to DC. It's kind of close to Norfolk. But you know, it's not far enough so that I don't think I'd be able to get demand. But only 100 kilometers, you know, if most of the cargo is flying into Washington, Baltimore, or whatever, then it'd probably, you know, fly across and just take a truck there. So Richmond might be a bit too close to the U.S. East Coast. This entire place basically is kind of overlapping, where For example, Washington's potential demand might be in a circle around this big, Philadelphia this big, and New York that big, and Boston this big, and they all kind of overlap, so it's really hard to pull demand. But for example, Kansas City is kind of just by itself. It's like more than 100 kilometers to the nearest other big city. Even more so for Denver and um, say Portland or Salt Lake City. So Albuquerque, Phoenix, Vegas. So if you could find a route with demand to a city like Albuquerque or some of those I just mentioned, you can be pretty confident that you can pull the demand yourself. Rogers Real World, I think it's in Kansas City. I'm not sure. KOKC, it could be Oklahoma City. I'm not sure, but OKC makes me think it's Oklahoma City. And so on and so forth. So these are some of the routes I've been making. Yeah, as you guys can see, Tulsa, I don't know where Tulsa is. I can't remember off the top of my head, actually. There's Tulsa. Don't tell me I can't tell you what city that is without looking it up. But yeah, this is basically what I've been looking for cargo. Passengers are a lot more straightforward. For example, if you go back to the first page, the amount of passengers is the amount of passengers. Frankfurt to LA, 1,000 demand, 1,400 supply. You know what? I'll probably sit that one out. I'd say the limit for profitability depends a lot on what kind of operation you're doing. For example, out of London Heathrow, I am very focused on premium product. And as you guys can see, LAX has 8,000 passengers a day and about 12,000 supply, though I know for a fact there's some randomness in the numbers it generates to prevent you from knowing exactly, but the actual number is probably around 7,500 per day. If I were to guess, see, this time I rolled 6,600, but 7,000, 7,500. With the amount of supply I'm having, I should only be getting maybe 80% load factor, but I'm getting around 90, so that overperformance basically of my ratio of supply to actual passengers is due to my custom cabins to be very premium focused. As you guys can see, with 4,000 supply, average, if we average these days, some days I have more, some days I have less. Usually the less popular days I have less, as you guys can see. And about 11,000 supply or 10,000 supply to cope with. I'm slightly overperforming in my actual load factor of around 90%, which is really, really nice. Though, to be honest, it's actually diminishing. Yeah. Interesting. Anyways, yeah, just looking at some of these routes. Ooh, Toronto CYYC is being oversupplied really bad. Hey, let me show you my routes management tab. This is a pretty interesting tab in the game where you guys can kind of see how your routes are performing. So VHHH, that's Hong Kong, 340,000 per flight, 90% load factor. That's really good. As you guys can see, the route is slightly oversupplied. Give us 15-ish%, maybe a little bit more. But I still have a 90% load factor, which is really nice. LAX, 92% load factor, which is just performing really, really, really nice compared to just how much oversupply is happening on this route. Very, very nice. I might want to consider adding more LAX flights. PHNL, that's Honolulu. Honolulu is really, really far, so it's relatively hard to get aircraft which can fly directly to Honolulu, and passengers don't really want to transfer in this day and age anymore. So if I want to add more flights to Honolulu, for example, I'm going to have to put in orders for a lot of preferably new aircraft with direct purchases, which is quite expensive. As you guys can see, I'm making about 100 million a week, and a day in this game is 25 in real life minutes. So not sure how many weeks pass per day, probably like 7 or 6. I can't do math, don't quote me on that. It seems like my internet is stuck or this website is stuck, one or the other. Okay, there we go. But yeah, basically that's why certain routes like that tend to have, not so much oversupply, while Dallas Fort Worth has a lot of oversupply, and generally right now fuel prices are high. So a lot of the competition has been dropping, and when fuel prices are low, I can see all my load factors here were more than 10% lower than where they are now, but a lot of those companies which are providing those oversupply bankrupt, and I can see my load factors climbing again. For example, Sydney had reached almost 1,000 oversupply, which is insane considering, as you can see, nobody really wants to supply this, and that's because it cannot be flown to directly. And passengers in this game don't really like non-direct flights, even though that's not 100% realistic. In real life, player people at these kind of rages really don't like direct flights, actually, on the contrary to how it works in this game. But it's such a niche thing, which only really affects Australia, that I guess that wasn't really bothered to be modeled. Jakarta has terrible, terrible passenger load factor, but has really great cargo load factor, so it's still a very profitable route. Yeah, as you guys can see here, the cargo is still, the cargo portion is really profitable, so it's nice. CYVR, that's reached 97% load factor. I could really increase my prices at this point. I haven't increased my prices for a long time because my load factors have been falling and falling and falling as competition has been increasing, increasing, increasing. But I'm guessing that this sudden fuel spike has taken out a lot of those competitors. Even routes like JFK are above 60% load factor again. And like as a reminder, it's JFK just looks like, yeah, a lot and a lot of oversupply. um, yeah. Uh, this just looks like a spreadsheet, doesn't it? Spreadsheet simulator, but it's kind of fun. Faj, as you can see, it's not that profitable, but at 200,000 for a 777 flying almost 5,000 nautical miles to Johannesburg is not very profitable. The reason why I don't want to not do it is because I don't want to give my opponents, Unify, Brexit, Blackwings, etc. I don't want to give them free market share. So I'm just going to take some of the market share anyway. By the way, this is economy, business, and this tiny yellow bar you might not even be able to see is first. Um, yeah, another reason why I'm not very profitable on fast routes is because my planes have a really large premium cabin. Because to the United States, which is my biggest market, of course, you need a really large premium cabin. But unfortunately, Johannesburg is not so premium, so I miss out a little bit there. Yeah. Anyways, this episode has been pretty long now. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I don't know if you guys want to see more, but I'm certainly down to record more if any of you guys are actually interested in this game and want to see me actually making new and scheduling new routes. I would need some planes to do that, so, I'm going to start ordering them up now. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time.